So
Those things that you left in the profession, sort of like advisory.
come up to the mic if you don't mind. That way,
This is being recorded, so
yeah,
others can listen.
So
push, make it red. There's a button. Nope, down the bottom. There you go.
sorry. The things that you left I'm Morgan Gaines. I'm the president of the New Hampshire Midwives Association.
Fantastic.
The things that you left in the profession, the midwifery profession, like, is it still an advisory sort of situation? So the OPLC will be reaching out for sort of like consult with the Midwifery Council, but still making the ultimate decision there as far as like medications and devices, scope of practice, those sorts of things? And then is it ultimately still the executive director's decision?
If
As I understand the changes we're making, the idea is that the executive director will make sure there are rules regarding that. But your organization and represented by the advisory board will be making the technical decisions on the scope of practice and things like that. They
So the
don't wanna
Midwifery
take
Council
over.
makes those actual, those decisions, not the
Yes.
OPLC?
Well,
Or
it's
together they
part
make
of
that
the
decision?
together, the OPLC will probably be nagging you to make sure you get them in on time.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Representative Allegro.
Morning, everybody. I have to say that this is a broader view of this bill, and this was a turning point for me, because that move to try to form a board with no midwives on it really opens my eyes and makes me very concerned about the motivations. And
Well, the prime sponsor
yeah, that's okay.
is
Well,
you can ask her. what
that's
her
okay. No,
motivations
it's
were.
not your
but-
motivation specifically. It's just the whole motivation of OPLC. And when I first came on board here, I understood what I thought was the purpose of OPLC. But I'm becoming more and more reticent to put more power into the hands of an executive agency once again.
Yep.
Right? These guys, they make the rules, they decide if the rule may have been broken, whether or not to initiate an investigation, they conduct the investigation, they render the verdict, they dictate the punitive actions. And this is the same thing with a lot of federal agencies. And I just really am hesitant about putting more power into the hands of OPLC. I'm going to be thinking about that every bill going
Sure.
forward.
Yep.
And this one, I just don't understand, honestly.
So,
I understand the intentions are good, but I think our way may be a little errant.
as we've talked about, the purpose of the creation of OPLC was very specific, and I personally don't want to create an empire. That is not the intent. The intent of the creation of OPLC was to remove a tremendous amount of duplicated functions and confusion, frankly, because we had folks that crossed professions and there was no consistency to anything. So again, that's why, going through this, there's certain administrative things that seem to make sense with them. But on the flip side of giving too much to OPLC, the alternative, what we've had is that we've had these boards that have had tremendous power as well. And how do we balance that, I guess, is probably, because the same thing is that, whether it's the Office of Professional Licensure or the original board that was created, that you're still instilling a limited amount or a substantial amount of power to a limited amount of people.
It's probably not relevant to the current council, but 10, 15 years ago, when I first got involved, the Midwifery Council was notorious for having a director who kept all the board's records in her back bedroom and wouldn't share them. And it was a problem to get that solved. I believe that has been solved, but it's an example of what can happen when you have a very small board and one person in charge who ran it like her own kingdom, which as I said, it happened, 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah, thank you. And like I say, I'm just rethinking these things. I'm not rendering my own decision right now. Yeah, thank you for that clarification, which I was aware of, but you added some things.
Representative Schuett.
Thank you. I'll add to what Representative McGuire said also regarding OPLC. This agency was originally put in place to run a few boards, and they ended up, an executive decision was made to try and consolidate many boards under it to ease the burden of the clerical work. We did see in the past that there seemed to be a mindset of building empire there. I will say I don't really see that motivation for the current leader, but the leadership changes, and
Right.
so that's what we're trying to guard against, and yet still allow them to be able to take over those administrative duties and the clerical work that the professions don't necessarily need to be bothered with, and to be more efficient, and a more efficient way to run state government.
Yeah, so this is a broad scope. We're not really picking on midwifery or any specific group, because there's been examples of issues in multiple boards. But that's why, going through the document here and carving out what, rather than just dumping the whole thing onto the OPLC, saying, okay, there are some places where it's appropriate for the professional board to retain, and you know what I mean? So it's spreading the power out in essence.
Yeah. Yeah, and I don't want to draw too much off the track from the focus of this meeting, which is the details of this bill.
Sure.
But, again, just for the last time, in the broader sense, you're right. I mean, a lot of power can be accumulated in the hands of a board, whether or not it comes under OPLC or not. The difference is that under OPLC, it now brings the force of law of the state.
The board had the force of law for its rules as well.
For,
Any rules that it may have generated. The
'Cause they were-
problem is that some of the boards didn't actually write rules.
Yeah,
They acted as if they did.
right. Yeah. These boards were not. They were statutory boards. So, again, that's. I think the midwives have something that they want to add to this. Go for it.
I'm Sherry Stevens. I'm the chair of the Midwifery Board. Sorry. I could take a long time and talk to you about the history of the board and the history of the relationship with OPLC, but that's not the purpose of this meeting. I have been on the board since 2015, and since then we have been desperately trying to work with OPLC, trying to get things to go through, trying to get things organized, watching them go through their growing pains and getting, even our licensure online done, which is still a little bit of a nightmare, and working through our investigations and using all these different entities to try to, we're trying to be like, the purpose of you is to organize, right? So you're going to organize our licensing process so that it's much easier. I've been doing it all myself for years, not because I wanted to, because there was nothing else there to do. And I've reached out to them multiple times and saying, you guys going to take this over? What do we need to do? And it wasn't until this last session, last fall, that they finally took it over. And it was a nightmare. It did not go smoothly, and it's not going to go smoothly this spring because they haven't got their software together. And so that's fine. We as a board aren't trying to take over the administrative duties. We're happy to work with somebody, but also the frustration level of handing over, our ability to license our, constituents, not constituents, but, the midwives, right? They need their licensure, and if it goes overdue because of administrative duties, we lose Medicaid, we lose Med-Mal, we lose our ability to order medications, and that's what's happening. So, we really want this organization to be organized and work for us. but taking it over and giving that power to somebody else that isn't really doing it for the midwives, they're doing it across the board. If they got that together, they got their rules together, and every board had their same way of running a meeting, every board had their same way of licensing, all that stuff was in place, happy. We would be thrilled. But then, what we see happening is you're taking over midwifery as advisory board, historically has put midwifery out of business. There's other states that moved midwifery into an advisory board, and it puts it in a very vulnerable state because somebody else can just decide, nope, we don't want that anymore, and it's gone. Even in Vermont, they keep using Vermont as an example, as an advisory board. They're very vulnerable to whoever's in that position. We would be very vulnerable, whoever's in that position of the executive director, and saying, we want midwifery, and they don't. And when you say, oh, we're not trying to get rid of midwifery, that's true right now. That's true. I totally don't think that that's this entity's desire, and I don't think it's the executive director's desire at all. I don't think this is an attack on midwifery specifically right here and now. But broadly, it most certainly is a danger for us. And having the executive director be in complete control over these things, they can decide, you know what, we want to have our licensure be $3,000, wipe out every midwife in the state. There is some talk about having everybody have liability insurance, wipe out every midwife in the state. That's not, you're not looking at how this profession is working and why it's working this way and why it's serving the women and the families of the state the way it is. There's a whole big issue, right, with Medicaid reimbursement, all that stuff. And these smaller hospitals are closing. There's midwives, there's myself and a midwife in Littleton, and that's the whole North Country. Families are not, and there's very few hospitals up there. So where are families going to go? They have to travel an hour and a half to give their birth to their babies. The midwives can fill in those spots. It's a very important profession. And this bill takes that out of our hands and puts it into an entity, OPLC. Why? What's not working? If there's something not working, if we need to have some level of protection for OPLC getting sued or the midwifery board getting sued, let's work on that. Let's figure that problem out, because that's probably across the board on every board, right? That's not just midwifery.
That's not the intent. OPLC's not there as some sort of a legal barrier. That's
That's
not
what they're telling us. They're telling us we're a small board, we're at risk of getting sued. That's why they're doing this. That's the reason they're telling this to us. So if that's what they're telling us, then let's solve that
That's news
problem.
to
This
me.
doesn't solve that problem.
I've never heard that before.
What is the problem? If we need to have administrative stuff going on with our licensing process, we need to have rules being made. We're working with that process. We are actively working
You're
with that
working with it,
process.
but I don't think you have the statutory authority to be doing what you're doing right now. That's part of the problem.
We're not doing anything on our own. We're doing everything with the lawyers at OPLC within a meeting.
But what I'm saying is, you just mentioned handing off some of the administrative functions to OPLC in the past few years. But where in statute has that been OPLC's responsibility to take that from you?
We're not asking them to do it. They're telling us that that's what we have to do, and we're trying to comply with what they're telling us. We're not asking them
I'm
to do it.
confused at
and
what you
they're-
said then, because you said that you have worked in the past in trying to get OPLC to handle administrative things. But I don't know that statutorily OPLC was required to do that for you, not until this piece of legislation came forward.
I have been doing it. The council has been doing it. And every time we go to a meeting, they say, you're not supposed to be doing that. We have a whole board over here. So when for instance, I got a new licensure come in, right, an application come in, I usually vet it. I usually call all the references. I call all the high schools. I make sure that the information is accurate. And then I present it to the board. The board votes, they look through it, they vote on it, and that person gets
I
a
don't see
license.
that changing. Yeah.
Excuse me, is the midwifery council you're talking about the same as the board?
Yes, sorry.
Okay, fine, that's part of my confusion.
I'm sorry.
From the
We
way
are
you were
we're a
describing
council.
it, it sounded as though it were a separate entity.
No, I'm sorry.
That's.
Board and council,
I could
we
be
sort of mixed
easily
them up.
confused.
So the last time we had a new application come in, I called the licensing part of OPLC, a woman named Sharon that we work with, and I said, what do you want me to do with this? Do you want to do this, or do you want me to do it? She goes, nope, do what you normally do. So I started calling and vetting. I got to the meeting, and I said, here's what I did. And the administrator of OPLC said, absolutely not. You're not supposed to be doing that. I said, since when? And I checked it out, and they said, nope. And so they took it, and they put it into their pool of licensing people, right? The licensing part of the OPLC, took it out of our hands, brought it back to us, said it was all vetted. I said, where's the vetting? Where's what you did? And they said, nope, don't have to do it. It's not in your law. And that person got licensed.
I don't understand how OPLC could have done that, because the authority for them to handle the administrative part of that is in this legislation that has not passed yet.
I agree
So-
with you. And I was like, okay, and then a new one came in. We didn't even look at it. They took it, they vetted it, and I said, where's the vetting? Did you call and vet this license? And they said, we don't have to. It's not in your rules to call, to call the high school, to call anybody's references. And I'm like, why would you even have to have that in a rule? That seems like an application's, that's just like basic administrative duties, right? You check out on somebody's references. They did not. And
So
then,
in this, you're going to get clarification of what is appropriate for the office to be doing and what is appropriate for your board to be doing.
right, but that's not what this is. This is the executive director is taking it completely out of our hands. They're running it, and you're gonna change our, that would be great if they were actually doing that, but they're not. So you're saying I as a council chair shouldn't have given them this application and let them do it?
I don't know that was, if the statute under the midwife council, I don't think that was appropriate.
Then why am I being told by them that's what I
Yeah,
have to do?
I don't know why
And
they're
so
being
this
told
is
that.
the entity that we're going to then give all this power to. This entity that is consistently not being clear and honest with us. And the licensing of the midwives in the state are at stake. And that's my problem with giving all this to this OPLC at this point in time. If they could say, here's our licensing operation, and then we look at it and we say, okay, that works. I mean, we want it to be consistent across all boards. Everybody does, right? That makes perfect sense organizationally. Every board having their own method of doing this is a nightmare. So that's the point of getting them organized. But we as a board right now, you're taking that and they're telling us, you need to do this, you need to do that, and it's not into the best interest of the midwives currently. And this new, taking our law and putting everything into the executive director and having her, administratively, you're saying attached, you're saying that she needs to, what was the words, in consultation with the board on this part and this part that we are experts on. That's absolutely appropriate. If it has to go through, we definitely want those parts in there. But the overall broader spectrum of this rule, this law change, is against the intent of the original 326D, establishing the midwifery board. The medical board has a medical board, the nursing board has a
Right,
nursing board.
and they're going to continue to remain autonomous, but the other 54 boards are going to all follow under the administrative oversight of OPLC. That's why it was created. And carving out one or two specific boards for this is not.
Oversight and administrative is great.
Mhm.
That's not the same as what this bill is doing. If they're doing their oversight and they're doing their administrative job, we have no problem.
Well, that's why this bill's going to be amended, and we plunked out the parts that are specific to the profession that are not administrative. That's the purpose of the subcommittee meeting, was to pull,
understand.
you know what I'm saying? But,
Yeah.
as far as like disciplinary action, investigation, subpoenaing, the basic process of renewals, all that is appropriate to be done under OPLC. That's just a purely administrative function. And that's across the board. That's not just specific to your profession. So that's The purpose of this is to take the things that are specific to the profession and leave them with the board to decide how their profession is run. But the rest of this, as far as just the processing of things, that is why OPLC was created.
Well, and I would have a lot of faith in that if I had seen even last week that worked for me.
But again, OPLC, I just find it peculiar that you have a relationship with OPLC that is not codified in law. Someone's jumping the gun here. So if you want to touch on that, OPLC wants to touch on that. Well, it seems like the right time's now, because it seems like we're having a bit of OPLC's jumping the gun here a little bit before this has actually been officially established.
Good morning.
Right, there you go.
Good morning. For the record, Joe Shoemaker, Director of Licensing and Board Administration for the Office of Professional Licensure. Representative Pearson, just to clarify, so when the OPLC was created approximately 6 years ago, all administrative functions for all boards were put in that original statute. So we have, since the office was created, always have had the authority for all administrative functions for the board, if that makes sense.
It was just a blanket statement of authority?
Yes.
And that's why we've spent the last 3 or 4 years cleaning up all this,
Yeah.
all of the interconnected statutes that touch onto that.
Correct. I understand there is some confusion, again, as Representative McGuire just said, because the different statutes for the different 54 professions were not changed or modified, but it's very clear if you go back through record and you go to the OPLC statute, all administrative functions for all boards, the authority was granted at that time.
That was not a smart way to do that.
Well, yes, that's correct. But that statute might have been better done at the time. But listening to the council, I'm concerned that they have procedures for processing applications that the OPLC is ignoring. And I would hope that you would take that to heart and fix that, because things like checking in something like midwifery, where there is a large practical aspect, you're going to need to check references and things like that. And I hope that that will be better coordinated with the board.
I want to be careful here. I'm certainly not here to throw stones and throw people under the bus. There's a couple corrections that need to be made. The records for the 38 midwives up until approximately a year and a half ago were at somebody's house. It wasn't 10 years ago. And it's been a concern for a long time. As we discussed earlier, part of the reason for this submission was there's been many things done that there's been legal concerns on. The reference to checking references per se, you can't have things done that aren't in rule or statute. So for instance, if you checked a reference and you determine it's not correct, and you withhold somebody's license, and there's no law or rule in place that says reference checks, and I'm using this as an example, are to be done, that becomes a problem. So we've continued to have concerns with investigations, with processes, and that's why this has come forward as it's come forward.
And when will you be revising your rules?
The rules are the responsibility of the board. We're here to assist the board with rulemaking. But again, and I don't want to get into a, throwing
that's fine.
stones, but again,
But assuming this bill passes, you're going to need to enter into rulemaking on a number of areas, and I'm wondering when that will happen. Because
We-
it
we-
sounds like that the board is working under a set of assumptions on how things should proceed that are not actually in the rule, but they understand are important to them, and therefore they should get into the rule.
yeah, I would say, one of my concerns in here is this law, if passed, would take effect 60 days later. As I think most are aware, 60 days to pass rules is very difficult. I would say, to answer your question, Representative McGuire, we would start immediately on rules. But, you know, best case, if all goes really well with boards that only meet once a month, JLCAR that meets once a month, best case is we are, you know, probably 90 days, 120 days if all goes really well.
Yes,
we-
but my experience is that once you actually start into rulemaking, people understand that you're taking it seriously enough.
Absolutely, and that's why we would start immediately.
Right, and the other thing too is, you know, these boards, the various boards, the scope, the size, the effect on professions is all different. And what I don't want to see is the smaller boards becoming the stepchildren of the OPLC, right? I mean, all of these boards
course.
need to function. That, again, the purpose being to make government flow better. And any time that we modify government with that intention and it flows worse, you know, we have to stop and pause and look at what happened, right? So, it seems to me that there is a clear communication problem right now, and I don't know if 1061 is going to force. I think it will force better communication, because there's some things that are going to change on both sides, but I do understand your trepidation with 60 days. That number can be adjusted. That's not a problem, but
Actually, it shouldn't, because you can't actually formally start rulemaking until the bill passes.
right. Yeah,
So we want it to start as soon as possible.
sure.
I guess the only other thing I would add is you know, as you know, Board Chair Stevens mentioned earlier, I want to make sure it's pretty clear here. This bill was created, and if passed as written, as an advisory board, the authority, you know, for ultimate decision-making would lie with the executive director. And that's where we mentioned earlier, and I think Director Courtney submitted a amendment that I have here in front of me that certainly adds in every place in consultation with the board. But it seems like there was some confusion earlier in our discussion. I want to make sure everybody's on the same page.
I don't really see any other areas to, I mean, other than what we've done already for the in consultation part. I mean, this is a relatively short one, and again, the rest of this is just all process stuff, administrative stuff, investigations, renewals. That's all paperwork stuff, so. I can certainly email you a copy of what the amendment looks like.
Yeah, I'm just curious, so as the amendments are written right now, does that still leave the executive director as the final decision maker, even if there's an advisory board? Because that's a single entity, and as something
Yes.
I mentioned before, leadership changes. Right, so leadership changes, the executive director that we have today may not be a concern, but if it changes in 3 years or 5 years, and we have somebody who comes in who is not in favor of out-of-hospital birth, which has happened in other states, there is definitely a threat to midwifery in that case if you have a single entity making a decision, even with an advisory board. So the advisory board essentially could say, no, we don't agree with whatever is being proposed. If the executive director is the
The
ultimate decision
executive
maker.
director does not have unfettered authority to make changes to the rules. They have to
Right.
follow the laws. And we have a legislative oversight to ensure that that is the case. This chapter that I was just about the Midwifery Council starts out by saying that we're in, what does it say? Here we go. Midwifery. it starts out by saying that the state is part of the culture, that childbirth is a culmination of pregnancy, a natural process rather than an illness. The services of a certified midwife are a reasonable alternative for pregnant women, and intends that the scope of midwifery shall be modeled on the international definition of midwifery, etc. So that's in the law.
And that's not
in-
changing.
That's not changing, and the executive director has no ability to change any of the rules that would conflict with that.
Okay. Okay, thank you for that.
If I may state also, for the members of the council, that as part of the activity of this committee, because as you know, we're acting on these bills for several different boards, and we are attempting, when we put these forward to the full legislature, to specifically state the intent of the legislature is to maintain the autonomy of the boards to control their professions, and that OPLC does the administrative and clerical work. That we're trying to state that as the intent going forward on all of these, to protect boards such as yourself.
And keep in mind too, the write-ups that occur that we do when in this is part of the legal record. So when judicially, when they look at law, they will pull what we write to look at legislative intent, and that's why we write them. You know what I mean? It's a clarification thing. So
And so does the lawyers that review the rules. They look at the legislative intent
Yep.
very closely.
okay, so seeing no other issues, I'll close. If you want, sure. And then we'll end the subcommittee meeting.
I guess my frustration is, as the chair of the New Hampshire Midwifery Council, and I've said to you that I have tried to work with OPLC, and every time we come up to an issue, a new one comes up. You know, first it's you're a small board, then it's you don't have, you know, enough members on your board, which we haven't had a problem with quorum. We had a small problem this summer. Our rules, our laws say we have 4 meetings a year. We have 12 meetings a year. So we've met our quorum by 4, you know, so if we had a few meetings that we didn't have quorum because somebody was ill, we've met our judicial, we've met our law. But it keeps coming up as an issue, and it makes it sound like it's an issue,
Sure.
and it's not. In terms of the records, you know, I have been chair since, I don't know, I've been on the board since 2015. And when I say I've worked with OPLC, when I've done the recertification or the certifications or any of the investigations, we've, you know, given them the records. I'm not holding anything. The midwife before that had no place to put them. There was, OPLC was, you know, and as soon as it came to a place where we could put them, we brought them. And there was boxes and boxes, and we don't know where they're. If I wanted to call up a record from an older midwife, I don't know where I would get it. I'm assuming it's in there, but on the OPLC site, it lists who is current midwives and who's lapsed. It doesn't have the whole history. So
Yeah,
it's
that's not unique to you at all. That holds true for a lot of the
Right,
boards.
so that's-
And there is someone at OPLC that is working backwards
And
in
that's
the
great,
records.
and that's wonderful, and we know they're gonna fix it. I do have faith they're gonna fix it, right? But, you know, it's like now, it's been brought up, you know, they're holding things in their house. I'm not holding anything, and when I've given something, we've had administrators assigned to us from OPLC that change. I give them a bunch of stuff, it changes, it goes away. I'm trying to track it. I keep it as the chair so I can keep track of things, so things don't get lost, because this is, an investigation is, you know, a mother and a baby. A license is somebody's profession, you know, so I'm trying to keep track of things, and I'm constantly getting a new administrator and saying, here's this stuff. And I give it to them, and the next meeting, they're gone, and I don't know where it is. so we give it again. We're really trying hard. I have nothing against the OPLC. We want this burden to be given to them for the administrative stuff. But the concern is the control of it, right? Where is that stuff going? And if we could trust that the profession of midwifery didn't have a stake in this, we wouldn't be so concerned, but we are. And so I just want to address that because every time I sit down to one of these meetings, something new comes up. And I'm like, has anybody asked me? Have you asked me when they want something, what do you do with it? I give it to them, happily. I give it to them 10 times if they need it. You know, we are not trying to work with them. But again, statutorily, we're giving them things that, are we even supposed to be, right? Like, we work with the rules lawyers. We've done our rules several times in a row. We work with the people from OPLC, sit down, work with them. We're giving them the expertise, and they're giving us the right words to do it. We've gone through the GELCAR process several times. You know, we're not trying to make our rules ourselves. We're trying to work within the system the way it's supposed to, right? The boards make the rules, that goes through GELCAR, it gets vetted by the bigger professionals that know this is okay and this is not. So I don't understand, I just don't, like, I understand they're trying to take all these small boards and organize them, but I'm just a little confused to where this is all coming from, but anyways.
Okay. All right, I'll close the subcommittee meeting on 1061 here.
Yes, I saw a note that the governor intends to improve licensing, and since he hasn't told me how he intends to do it. Yeah, well, that's one of the issues that,
It was in the state of us,
yeah, well, that's great.
which is great, but yeah, that doesn't translate to action.
we've heard these complaints
So,
time ago.
I think that's a valid concern that we need to have better oversight over OPLC, and that's,
Well,
I do not personally know exactly how to do so.
Well, we could model it, you could,
Or else
well, no, you could model it after Health and Human Services. Health and Human Services Committee has an oversight committee for the Department of Health and Human Services. It would make sense that ED&A
And I
would have an
know
oversight.
Representative Merchant was going to put something forward for this session, but he didn't come
I
forward.
mean, it wouldn't be germane to either of these bills,
No.
but to,
No, well,
Yeah,
to create
if
an
you
oversight
wish
committee.
to do so, we haven't yet got any Senate bills, but I've noticed that a large number of them look like they're dead on arrival. So if you want to come up with a oversight committee, we can do a non-germane amendment, because I think that's not a bad idea.
Right. And you could model it, like I said,
Health and Human
Health
Services?
and Human Services Oversight Committee, and it would just there would be an oversight committee that ED&A would have over OPLC for the purposes of this same.
Well, of hearing the concerns from the
Concerns,
boards.
yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, I'll see if I can whip that up.
No,
Well,
s-
you got time, I mean, if we're gonna attach it onto a Senate bill
Okay.
or rewrite a Senate bill,
Yeah,
right?
we wouldn't do that.
sure we would. I mean, they're sending us a whole bunch of days.
I was
Are they really?
Yeah, like I said, dead on arrival. And